white balance is something that you don't really notice, because what happens is the eye becomes accustomed to a certain color and it will make it look white. That's why if you're in a room and you have those traditional old-fashioned tungsten style lights, they're actually really yellow, but if you sit in that room long enough, you'll look at the walls and to your eye they'll look white. Same with if you have the old-fashioned fluorescent lights in your room, and they send out a green cast, but after a while your eye becomes accustomed and you don't really notice it. When you do notice it is if you work with these lights with a camera, digital camera, and it'll pick up the cast, particularly if you haven't set your white balance in your camera properly. Now, you don't necessarily need to set the white balance in the camera if you're shooting raw. What I advise against is using auto white balance, particularly when you're doing lots of shots in different locations, because what the camera does is it'll change the white balance depending on where you're shooting, and you're going to get like hundreds of different shots with completely different white balance. What I recommend is you shoot raw, and what I do is I set my camera to I have a set white balance, and mine is 5200 Kelvin, and that's whatever. It doesn't matter what I'm shooting, unless I'm shooting on a television set or a film set somewhere where they're using studio lights that are tungsten balanced, and then I might correct the white balance for that. But for general day-to-day shooting, I start with a white balance setting of 5200, and you can go into the camera and you can preset that just by going into the menu button. There's a point in the camera where you can change that and lock it and set it so that that's your white balance for everything. And then what I do is I will adjust my white balance in post based on the job and apply that to all the images. Now, the easiest way to set your white balance is to actually use a grey card in the shot. A lot of people forget to do that, and so here's the next best way is, so an image like this, or let's say this, when I compare it to this one, you can see that it's kind of yellower all over. It's quite warm. And so what I can do, what I can show you here it is as shot. If I do a white balance on this, let's just find a nice area of white. Let's say this cushion here. Big difference from what it was, which to the naked eye it kind of looked like it was all right, but you can see just how much over here if I go back to as shot. All right, have a look at how these move when I do the custom white balance. All right, so what it's done is it's added a lot of green, and it's also dropped the temperature considerably. So this image, what we couldn't see was that it had a lot of magenta in it. And now that like I flick on and off, you can actually see that it had a lot of magenta and it was overly warm. And that's because this was lit with a combination of daylight. I actually had light behind me when I was doing this shot. And it's also the overhead lights had a bit of a magenta in them. So it makes a huge difference once you do the white balance. Here's another example. So a wedding cake, and this is actually, again, it's lit by television lights, and so they're quite warm. So when I shot this with my white balance set to 5200, you can see that it's wrong, and you could kind of like, if you looked at it long enough and had nothing to compare it to, the whites will actually, to the naked eye, start to appear white. Until we do a white balance here, and again I'm going to just find a nice white point, so usually the tablecloth is a good place to start. Have a look at the difference there. So, and this is absolutely crucial if you're photographing fashion, brides, anything that needs you to have correct color. It also makes a huge difference to how your images look overall. Nothing. It's the difference between a beginner and someone who's like more of a professional photographer, that the first thing you do is make sure that you've got correctly color balanced images. Okay, so coming back to Sonia's image here. So here's an image that Sonia has shot quite well, and the color balance isn't as quite as off as the images that these last two examples that I gave you, but it is still a little bit out. So she's got it set to a daylight, which is 5200, which is pretty close. But what we need to do now is find a good white point in this image that we can create a good white balance. So it's just a matter of finding the right one. Now I'll show you where the wrong ones are, and that is when I'm looking at an image like this, I want to find a good white point, but it's critical that you don't use a brightly lit area. So if I was to come in here and use this area, it's going to give me quite a warm image. It's warmed it up, and it still looks, it's not giving me that crisp white look. I can try an auto. All right, and auto again it's still for some reason it's saying that okay, well this for this kind of lighting is correct. This is the neutral point for this image, and it's still not looking crisp and white. So what I like to do is find an area that is white but in shadow. So like this area here that's in shadow, it's of the cake, so it's in a soft shadow. This is more of a neutral white. If I do a click balance off that, or off the side of the cake, the opposite side to the light, you're going to find that you get a far more neutral white balance. So can you see the difference there from before and after? It's quite subtle, but you'll notice that it, like in here, it's dropped the color temperature considerably. And I can also try just in here in the shadow. All right, and that's also going to give me a really neutral looking white. My other trick is if you're photographing a person and you don't have a white point anywhere in the picture, go by their eyeballs and go by the darker part of the whites of their eyes. Not too far across, but like particularly a baby's the baby's eyes that have pristine white, and that gives you the best, most neutral white point of all. So now you've got quite a crisp white image, and I think overall this image is a little bit underexposed. So I just would give it about half a stop and make sure there's a good black point as well. About there. And probably you just want to make sure that you don't lose detail in the cake, which is the cake. See, we've still got all the texture there in the cake, and you can see the difference between the side of the cake, the top of the cake, and there's still detail between the background and the side of the cake there. So that is still pretty spot on in terms of light and looking quite good. And I think that as a white balance is about right there. So that's before and after. I'll just go with the reset, it's quicker. So that was where we started and that was where we ended. So basically just using your color picker in the develop module, and always look for a white area that's not in direct light. That's going to give you a false reading. Look for an area in shade, or if you don't have anything better to use, then go with the whites of the eyes. They always work.